And I'm Samantha Asamoah, and this is the
NDA Podcast.
No dickheads allowed.
Apart from acid bag.
He's not on this week.
I know, but he was.
This week we have Mark Watts on the show, and he's an investigative journalist and also the coordinator of the Freedom of Information Centre. So he'll be on a little bit later.
How was your week? Your last 2 weeks since we recorded?
Last 2 weeks. What have I been? I think I've been in and out of the lawyer's office most of the last 2 weeks. But
I know that feeling.
Yeah,
I'm all about that life, that lawyer's life.
Yeah,
that's
that
my life.
editing, writing, all of that stuff. But generally, what we were going to go into, because you found a story that you were like,
do you know what? Because this sort of coincided with something that happened in my life, and it's happened to me more than once. Basically, I was watching a video online. You guys might have seen it, and it's about 2 innocent black women in Target minding their own business, and one of them says, "Oh, you should get that dress, it makes you look like Eartha Kitt." The other one said something like, "Oh, I don't want to look like her because she did a sex scene." And before they know what's happened, Miss Becky of Becktown, Bexdale, comes flying over to them going, "You're talking about sex in public."
We were having a conversation.
And if
we were having a conversation. What did we say?
It's gonna be on Twitter, y'all don't stop.
Exactly. What did we say?
I'll just stay.
Please repeat what we
What
said.
did we say?
You were talking about sex in public.
What exactly did we say? What exactly did we say?
Because that's how you acting.
What exactly did
Are
we
you having
say?
sex in public?
I mean, that's what you're.
That's what you screamed out loud.
I said,
that you
are
were
we-
having sex in public.
No,
That
I
is
said,
not what
are
we said.
Where is your hearing aid today, honey? Because you're not hearing real good.
I said, Tara, try this on because this looks like something Eartha said. I don't want to be compared to Eartha Kitt because she
I just
had
understand
sex.
this is what you guys
That's
do.
what I'm asking. That's what I'm
Engage
asking.
with
What
this
did we
woman
say
any longer,
specifically?
please. I want us to stop
Okay,
engaging
well,
with
come
this
on.
woman.
Let's stop.
Let's have finish
Yes,
with the hat.
let's stop engaging with her, please. Let's stop.
Can't hear.
Thank you.
That's very clear.
Then she's talking to 2 grown-ass black women going, "Oh, is that what you do?" These black women are saying, "Go away. Go away and leave us alone." And she goes, "No, what kind of people are you?" And it ended up in this crazy situation where the manager was actually called for these black women because this white woman had decided they were talking about sex in public, which, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, I don't know every law in every state in America, it's not illegal, even if they were.
the audacity of it, regardless
Right.
if it's illegal, legal or not.
Right.
You know, come on. There's 2 women. They're adults. They're talking. They're shopping. What
Right.
on earth has it got to do with anybody else?
Thank
yeah?
you. And what I found so annoying about it, because I had this in my own life, is like, it's hard enough to just exist as a black woman. I don't think people understand the stress that we have to go through from day-to-day
Well,
life.
yeah.
I mean, there's so many hashtags. There's been laughing while black, parenting while black, breathing while black.
Criming while black. Did you hear that a few
No.
years about? Yeah.
I don't know.
It's. I think it's just about how white people will do a crime and somehow get away with it, where black people, you know, it's all this time.
we
all
know about the disparity and
Yeah,
stuff like
it's
that.
climbing while white. Sorry, not
Right.
Black,
Oh,
yeah.
yes, I saw that one.
Yeah.
But I mean, in terms of like black people, the amount of times, and I'm finding this very specific to a certain type of white woman, and I've had this a few times this year, and I'm done, where you as a black woman, they feel they can step up to you and dictate how you should talk, how loud you should laugh, what you should wear, and make these judgments. And when they are called out on their nonsense, they always come with some maternal stuff. Like, they never own their racist nonsense. They will come
Or
with...
they call the manager.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. By the way, if you're not following Paris Burned, and that is his Twitter handle, he's hilarious. And his pinned tweet has summed it up for me. He said, if straight black men go out with white women because they think they're more docile, he has never, ever seen a white woman who wants to see the manager. And there is a call the manager mentality with these people who seem like they've never been told no. It's always the cishet ones, tends to be the middle-aged, frustrated ones who've never been told no.
Underlying it is entitlement. That's what is going on.
What it is.
It's not even just privilege, it's entitlement.
And what upsets me about this situation is it doesn't matter how much you try to do the right thing as a black woman, like, because we know we're not allowed.
Right thing. It's just living your life.
I'm talking about
but
do the right thing, like what you've been advised to do, right?
Right.
When
okay.
someone's
In that
coming
situation,
at you and you say,
I see.
back off, leave me alone, go away, walk away, I need to turn around. What annoys me is they won't let you. It's like, you really want to fight. You want to have this fight. Okay, we're going to have this fight. And when you do have it, it's like, oh, see how angry and abusive black women are. I am going to propose. Black women are not the angry ones.
Well, I mean, this
We're
kind
not-
of brings us on to Kate Ossamore slightly, because this whole situation that's happened with her, I do not believe this woman came shouting and screaming downstairs in the middle of the night because there was somebody outside. I believe that there was a lead up to this.
Oh, there was
this
some
thing.
level of provocation.
I mean, you've been harassed by the press before. What could
I've been packed before. Yes, outside court. I didn't do anything because I knew what they were trying to do. And, I watched like a Princess Diana documentary once and I saw what they were doing and they were calling her whore and slag. And what they want is that photo. They want you to pull that face and they want you to do that angry black woman face.
Just lastly on Kate, I mean, I was quite irate by all the stuff that was going on and the things being said by various journalists, including Hadley Freeman, Helen Lewis, all of them. So I just sort of grabbed a picture of her and put a definition of misogynoir up on Instagram, and it says, and misogynoir is a term referring to misogyny directed towards black women where race and gender both play roles in bias. And I linked it to a quote of something by Maya Goodfellow, who said, a black woman who challenges the status quo and won't apologise for doing so will always be judged unfairly because too many subconsciously feel it's not up to people like her to be the voice of opposition. And that's Maya Goodfellow who said that.
I absolutely agree with that. Yeah. And, Kate's just not that type, though. She wasn't really, she's not an out and abrasive. It just goes to show it doesn't matter what kind of black woman you are. You could be a Cambridge-educated black woman like Diane Abbott. You could be a woman like Gina Miller, who is she's a lawyer, right?
Yeah.
Isn't she?
Or like me.
Or
I'm from a council estate.
Like
We're here
her,
now.
or you could be like me, just a gobshite comedian. And we all get the same treatment. So then you have to say it's not about your personality type, as people try to claim. It's just the fact you're a black woman. And as Marcus loves to say, who is the editor-in-chief of Writers of Colour, just say you hate black women and go.
Mm-hmm.
You may have noticed behind us is a beautiful wax print cloth. And that's because we're sponsored by Wax Print Film. Wax Print Film is the story of one fabric and how it came to symbolise a continent, its people and their struggle for freedom. Feature documentary directed by Aiwan Obinyan.
Today we have with us Mark Watts. Hi.
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. How are you?
It's pretty good. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, because...
So I'm a journalist. I also run something called the FOIA Centre, which is a specialist research company, FOIA standing for Freedom of Information Act. I'm a journalist who's worked for several national newspapers and broadcasters.
Okay. And the last time I saw you was during the Trashy Awards, where you gave the award for the... well, you tell me, what was it again you gave the award for?
I think it was for Publication of the Year, which was won by The Spectator.
Fantastic.
Run by my favourite, Fraser Nelson. Hi, Fraser.
Yes, he's the editor-in-chief, but they also won for Rod Liddell's article, Worst Article of the Year, joint with Kath Weiner at the Guardian. So, a a double whammy for Fraser there.
I think at this point, Rod Liddell is basically trying to sort of out-troll himself.
Yeah.
He's just getting worse and worse and worse. And I think now...
He's become a parody of himself.
Yeah. If you're giving him a platform now, you know exactly what you're doing.
Exactly.
You're doing it on purpose.
Well, yeah, I mean,
it's just pathetic.
What was it? The Sun. He was in the Sun a couple of days ago doing an article. I only saw a clip of it, but about Kate Ossemore, wasn't it? And it was just absolutely awful. I think Labour have complained to the Sun about it, or to the IPSO and so on. Did you see that?
I didn't. I managed to miss that.
Well, I mean, Kate has got her issues that's going on, but I think his last line was she only got as successful as she was because of the colour of her skin.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking the only reason you're in this paper is because of the colour of your skin, and you're able to get away with it and write these columns over and over again, and they're not very different from each other.
No,
there's racism, xenophobia, transphobia.
Boring.
Yeah. But anyway, thank you very much for for coming, but also for the Trashies and that award. I think that was a fantastic speech. So yeah. But we were going to talk about, well, your work has covered lots of different areas over years, as some quite famously breaking some news and so on. But I wanted first to go into your work with the Freedom of Information Centre, because I think last week, I mean, everybody knows who Stephen Yaxley Lennon is. Well, that's his real name. His actual name he goes by is Tommy Robinson. And he's generally in the news every day. There was a woman on Twitter who is called Dr. Louise Raw.
Oh, I know Louise.
You know her?
Yeah,
really? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let's not libel her in that case. Well, no, we're not going to. Sorry, I'm just going to read out her tweets, because she is in the act of trying to find out some information.
Oh, is she?
And she's doing... through that, she's doing it under the Freedom of Information Act. So she said, I'm about to tweet in full City of London's refusal to give me the Tommy Robinson rally information under the Freedom of Information Act. Basically, he went after his recent court case. He went and did a speech outside the court. He put a platform, the Old Bailey, and put a platform out there. And so... she's been trying to find out who paid for this platform. You know, it doesn't come free. Yeah. And so after Tommy Robinson's mini Nuremberg outside the Old Bailey in October, I asked City of London who applied and paid for that bloody stage. They wouldn't tell, so I had to put in an FOI request. They just responded and still won't tell me, which is interesting. And City of London have slapped in a Freedom of Information Act exemption on my request. A less trusting person than me might wonder what they're hiding. And now she put that, and I kind of brought you into that tweet and asked you, could you perhaps help and see what it's all about? And you did reply. Maybe you want to read your reply rather than me.
I said, do you still need help on this? Obviously, it was a while before I saw the tweet. The approach for the info should have been to ask under FOIA for a copy of all correspondence at City of London Court and City of London Police between protest organisers and licensing officials, including any licence for the event, in quotation marks. I mean, the problem is that the initial request, I think it was framed as asking who has funded this, and that trips up one of the sections under the Freedom of Information Act, an exemption, I think it's section 40, which specifically relates to personal data. Now, I think this is often misapplied, but the point is, if you're asking for anything that sounds like personal data, there's a great danger that's going to be invoked. Mm-hmm. And it's what's known as an absolute exemption, meaning that they don't have to sort of do a weigh up of the public interest in disclosing versus the public interest in not disclosing. It's an absolute exemption. If the exemption applies, end of story, they don't disclose. Right. So what I was suggesting is really need to approach this in a different way, and to ask for all the correspondence between the corporations, licensing officials, and whoever it was who organised the rally. Okay. Just ask for all the correspondence.
So never put the word who.
Yeah, avoid that. And the point is, if you extract that correspondence, it's going to answer the question that you really wanted answered, and perhaps a whole lot more as well.
Is this a very English way to do things? Just because it's probably kind of been very polite and going round about the houses.
Around about the houses. It is kind of around about the houses, yeah. I mean, the other thing is you don't really want to ask them to do any work. It's not for them. You don't want to get them to extract the information that you're specifically interested in. So you ask for a slightly broader brush, as it were. although it's limited, it's there isn't going to be that much correspondence between the organisers of the event and the council officials. So it's focused in one sense, but it's wider ranging in the sense that who knows what might pop out of that.
Indeed.
And I was also suggesting that she should do the same thing, but with the City of London Police, because they have a role in licensing events.
Yeah, they put out the gates and all of that
Right.
sort of thing, so they'll have to know
They have a
what's going on.
licensing department that works in conjunction. In fact, what I didn't say, but would probably also be worth doing, is ask each for the correspondence with each other, i.e. the City of London Police and the City of London Corporation.
And that's okay, they will give that because...
Well, I'm not guaranteeing that they will, because they'll often find excuses not to do so. But I think it's likely that they will.
And so it looks like is not a journalist. Would a journalist know to do the steps that you have...
No, I think, obviously I spent a lot of time talking to journalists about how to go about using the Freedom of Information Act. And I think generally journalists find it very frustrating because they don't get anywhere with it. And I think that's largely because they don't really know how to use it.
Game the system, is that the right term?
I'm not sure it's gaming the system, it's just using the system. I mean, in a sense, the problem you have is that the other side is often gaming the system. What I mean by that is they're looking for excuses not to disclose things. That happens a lot.
Is that a blanket thing, or is that in certain cases? Because this obviously is a hot topic, and they don't want to be dragged over the coals. But people could want information about all sorts of things.
It's a default position, which of course it shouldn't be. The requirement under the Freedom of Information Act is there's a presumption to disclose unless you can come up with a very good reason as to why not. But in practice, public bodies work from the opposite default position. In reality, they would all, of course, deny it, but they do. And that's really comes down to Britain's culture of secrecy, which manifests itself in so many different ways. I mean, non-disclosure agreements is an example of that, NDA.
I know about those.
But that's just one example.
Yeah.
And the refusal to comply with FOIA is another one.
Yeah.
Although we have FOIA now, belatedly, many years after America and even more after Sweden, but it's not really something that any public bodies really believe in.
Yeah.
Do you think that's something that would change in our culture very soon, or
not very soon? No, very slowly. The Freedom of Information Act was introduced. It became law in this country in 2000 under the Tony Blair government, and Tony Blair described it astonishingly as the biggest mistake he had ever made. Not going and bombing the hell out of Iraq. That was a minor.
not changing Labour into the Tory party?
But it was introducing the Freedom of Information Act. How stupid could I have been?
He knows what he's done, and people probably using it on him. So,
But so you use the term culture of secrecy, and that's a British thing. That's a big thing to say, and that probably covers a lot, because culture covers a lot. So can you say a little bit more about that?
Well, it manifests itself in lots of different ways. So Whitehall, lives in secrecy. It feels it's necessary to do its business. It's
Whitehall in the sense of like maybe the
central government departments, central government departments, but it manifests itself in local authorities. The other big area is the court system, in all sorts of ways. For example, to do a contrast, the Miami Herald recently did, which I did flag up on Twitter. The Miami Herald did an investigation looking at the prosecution, or rather the non-prosecution of Epstein, Jeffrey Epstein.
Yeah, I came across that article as well.
And of course he was prosecuted, but what they found by rooting around court documents and police files and all the rest of it, which they were able to do in the American system, is they were able to find that they basically didn't prosecute him for a whole lot of other stuff, although they did prosecute some things.
Right. Now because they had more evidence against him in some things. Because I'm assuming they would like to prosecute him for everything. But I mean, it's the same with the Hollywood producer. They were only able to prosecute him Harvey Weinstein on certain things. But why?
Yeah, so what they were able to find is that essentially there was a kind of prosecution deal done, but by looking at the files, it raised enormous questions as to why they had sort of left some things, as we would say over here, on file. Now, the reason I picked that up is that has happened here. Yeah. And of course, for obvious reasons, I can't specify which case, but I know of a case where that has happened here, where someone's been prosecuted, but a whole lot of other stuff was left on file. Now, I couldn't do the equivalent investigation that the Miami Herald did in the States because of the lack of open access that we have, particularly in the court system and surrounding police investigations. We just can't do the equivalent.
And so what did the Miami Herald come to? Was it a matter of the 8th? Because I think it's Attorney General there. They decided not to, or the local police, or the prosecutor? Where was the issue?
I think it was the state Attorney General, as was. So this is Florida. And this is somebody who's since been hired by Trump, funnily enough, as what is it? He's in the cabinet. He has a ministerial post. He might be Labour Secretary, but I'd have to double check that.
Okay.
I've forgotten his name, but he was the district attorney in Florida who was responsible for the decisions on the prosecutions and non-prosecutions in the Epstein case, and he's since gone to even dizzier heights, as it were.
Well, I
was just going to say, you have all these men upholding stuff because they know what they're doing themselves, and that's what's really annoying about it. You know.
But I know with Epstein that he did go to prison, but it was pretty much an open prison where he was able to go and work in his office during the day. Was that part of the AG's deal, or?
Yeah. The outcome was he got a much lighter sentence than he would have done if they'd gone for the other stuff as well.
Right. Okay. And so you think there's corresponding cases that could have been prosecuted here?
There's a specific case I'm aware of, which I'm aware of from police sources, who would no doubt be done under the Official Secrets Act if they were found out, as it were. At least they would be threatened with that. Whether it happens is another matter. But you can't do the same routing around. I mean, I as a British journalist have quite often found myself in the States routing around courthouses, in their files, or the Congress, because you can so easily access material. If you know what you're doing, you can easily access material which might shed light on stuff that's going on over here as well.
Oh, really?
But you can't do the equivalent here.
Right. And so you mentioned the Official Secrets Act. Is that something you've knocked heads with before?
I had to sign that.
You have to sign it?
When I was a prison officer, yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. God, we've not talked about your time as a prison officer on the show yet, have we?
No.
But you had to sign an Official Secrets Act.
And this is why.
No, I was thinking I'd be on the other side of the bars if she didn't behave herself. So yes, I've had to sign it, yeah.
Right, okay.
And it's quite interesting because we can really talk about other members of staff, but we're not really allowed to talk about the inmates.
Right.
You can't specify. So it's quite interesting when I started doing comedy and started talking about my time in the prison service, what I was and wasn't allowed to actually reveal and say. And then the police do it as well. Yeah. And that's how I agree with you about the culture of secrecy. There's all these, until it came up about NDAs and stuff, people didn't realise the extent of all these things that are going on and how many industries make you sign them. Yeah. It's just...
It's worth saying on the Official Secrets Act that it's often used as a threat to particularly former police officers and Whitehall, ex-Whitehall people as well. But often the threat is much larger than reality.
I mean, what is... Because I've got one of those gagging orders against me now. I mean, what is the actual penalty for breaking it?
Well, the Official Secrets, that's a slightly different thing. But, you can go to jail for breaching Section 1 or 2. And one relates to being the official or ex-official who's giving away a secret, and the other section relates to the journalist receiving it. So you can both end up in jail. And the reason why it's a kind of threat that people shouldn't worry about as much as they do is because it's a discredited law. And there was a particular case where somebody, a whistleblower, ex-GCHQ official, revealed some dodgy goings-on in terms of voting at the UN to do with the Iraq War, in fact. And on the face of it, it seemed to be a plain breach of the Official Secrets Act that she'd committed. Her defence would have been, but this was the right thing to do. It's right to tell the world about this. Now, this defence doesn't exist in the Official Secrets Act. However, we have jurists, thankfully, in this country, and jurists tend to be pretty sensible. And there's always a danger that they're going to turn around and say, this is nonsense. This should have been revealed. And of course, as soon as that happens, if you get a case of that, where a jury says that, the Official Secrets Act is blown away. Now, in that particular case, the ex-GCHQ woman, they did not prosecute her. And I think that failure to prosecute should make people realise the threat of Official Secrets Act, when it comes to revealing things that, quite frankly, should be revealed, is much more of a threat than reality.
Right. Yeah. And so what would that have come under, in the interests of the public? Or what?
Well, the Official Secrets Act so it doesn't weigh that up. It's simply...
but you're saying this GCHQ woman, she revealed this and they didn't prosecute, and that was based on what the jurors decided, but what was their
Well, we don't
legal...
know. We don't know why they didn't prosecute, but my view is that it was obvious because they thought they were going to lose, and if they lost, then that would have completely blown apart the Official Secrets Act.
Right.
They would never been able to use it again, and they need it desperately to be in place because they need people to shut up, people who we need to talk.
And so then, in that case, that kind of leads us on to WikiLeaks. I know Julian Assange is in the press a lot at the moment, but what are your feelings, if any, on them as a...
Well, they obviously had this extraordinary leak of American intelligence material, which revealed all sorts of things across the board. I suppose the problem was that they weren't very. They didn't really manage it very well in terms of applying some thought about what should be disclosed and what shouldn't. I mean, I don't think anyone should adopt the view, which I think they tended to do, of just reveal everything. I think you do have to assess it. You have to assess whether a specific document should be revealed or should be partly revealed, depending on the consequences of revealing it. And they didn't go through that kind of exercise. So I suppose that's a journalistic approach. And what has to be recognised about WikiLeaks, they weren't a journalistic outfit. But it was they had some astonishing leaks that were incredibly revealing. And I think, they've been pretty much persecuted for doing that.
But my understanding about them, I mean, from what I heard about them when they first started, I thought they started to be quite left-wing. And everything I hear about them now sounds quite right-wing.
Yeah, actually.
Like their politics seem to have changed, and I don't know if
it
it's
was
the people
revealed
behind it.
DMs with one of Trump's sons and all sorts of things.
Like they were instrumental in helping bring Hillary Clinton down, weren't they? But when they first started, it was about...
She helped herself.
Well, yeah,
but then Trump
I'm not saying that
she's a juggernaut. Yeah.
But yeah, the things they seem to be signing up for now and involved in...
Well, they
don't
seemed to get
very
a load
nice.
of leaks, didn't they, to do with Hillary Clinton's emails, and there are big questions about where that came from.
Yeah.
And I think, again, using the journalistic mind, you do have to ask yourself, where does information come from?
Yeah.
What's the motivation behind it being supplied?
Yeah,
And in the same ways, they didn't really assess on that original leak whether or not stuff should be disclosed.
Yeah.
There wasn't that kind of assessment on where's this information coming from, and is it, can we take it seriously? Should we be telling the world about it?
And that's a shame, because then they found they had a lot of cables to do with Saudi Arabia and I think around Yemen and the Middle East, which were, they came out and there was a big fuss for about 5 hours, and then that was it. And I think that was a real shame, because I'd like to know a little bit more about, say, the ins and outs of Saudi Arabia's regime, or I hate that word across the board, but so it's a shame they kind of lost their great reputation initially, because
I think
there
again,
is
That's attention
a great...
spans there. I don't know what's wrong with people. Like, we've got a government that's in contempt and no one's really doing it.
No,
Like,
it's
people
historic,
just seem to go,
isn't
oh,
it?
wow. We'll talk about that for a couple of days and then just go.
I mean, that does happen. That's obviously frequently a problem. But I think, again, they made a big mistake because they sort of just dumped everything to the world at large, all in one go, unprocessed, unanalyzed. And although that, barring the point about assessing what should have been held back for security reasons, by security, I mean security, people's safety, by putting everything out in one go, people didn't really know which way to look.
Yeah, and I guess journalists are busy and so. So do you think their heyday was when they were working with Glenn Greenwald and so on in The Guardian?
Well, I think the big thing really was that initial tranche they had, out of it was the cables, the diplomatic cables, which they got all in one go. I mean, there were a lot of insights in there. There's no doubt. And since then, we've had things like the big leak of the so-called Paradise Papers, which gave a real insight into
Paradise or Panama?
Paradise
both. One
right.
after the other, Panama and then Paradise, as it were, which both made major revelations of the offshore world, which is something I've bumped into as a journalist. And we have a big culture of secrecy here, which is only matched by the culture of secrecy in the offshore jurisdictions, which, by the way, we, the Brits, are specialists in.
Oh,
it's really
yeah.
our shadow
Well,
empire.
even we've got the Queen. The Queen was in there. There was Emma, who is it? The actress.
Thompson.
No, not Thompson, the younger one.
Emma Watts. Is it Watson?
Watson. Emma Watson.
Watson.
She was in the Panama Papers, but she's thriving. Obviously, the Queen isn't going anywhere. But there was a lot of men. Sorry, I've picked out 2 women, but yeah, that kind of blew over.
I think a lot of time
things
it's
that
people
don't blow
say
over.
accountants though that do this stuff, and they go, "Well, I didn't know."
Yeah, but you've got to give the go ahead, like with lawyers as well. They don't act if without your permission. So.
I mean, in a
I
way,
think a lot of times they do stuff and you just sign it, especially if you're an actress like Emma Watson.
Well, the focus with these revelations often were about the celebrities, but of course, celebrities don't matter that much. Let's face it. What really matters in the offshore world are the corporations who are using the offshore jurisdictions to avoid tax. Avoid tax in the UK and the US and Western Europe and so on.
Okay. And so so you mentioned you've come across the offshore world in your work. Can you tell us a little bit about
Yeah,
that?
so sometimes when you're looking into a particular companies or properties, what you find is that they're owned by offshore entities, and then that becomes a brick wall because you can't get behind. You generally can't get behind who owns them. And there has been some discussion in this country about making that more open by forcing companies to declare who their actual end owners are, not who the front end owners are. So quite often if you look at a company, you'll see it's owned by some trust in the Bahamas or the BVI or Jersey or what have you. And even if you go to those jurisdictions, you can't then see, well, who owns that? So there are endless examples like this, particularly in Britain, of where the shutters come down.
Okay, and so you mentioned at the beginning you've done a lot of work over different years, but do you think it was the Rupert Murdoch disclosures that kind of made your career, if it's made or not? Tell us.
I don't know about that, but we had some fun with that. So this goes back to X-Ray, which was the investigative website, which I ran for 5 years, which ran from 2012 to 2016, I think I'm right in saying. And one of our early big stories was we'd got hold of a secret recording of a meeting between Rupert Murdoch and a group of his Sun journalists. In fact, there were quite a few recordings of that meeting, and we managed to get access to that, to hear it, get a transcript.
It's a disgrace. Here we are 2 years later, and the cops are totally incompetent. The idea that the cops have something come in and kick you out of bed and your families at 6 in the morning, it's unbelievable. Why are the police behaving this way? It's the biggest inquiry ever. Well, it's next to nothing. And now they're arresting their own who never even took money. What they do, what they did to you, and how they treated people. So, well, a couple of you come in for a cup of tea and fall down, and then you guys got thrown out of bed by gangs of cops at 15 at 6 in the morning. And I'm just sure.
So what this was about was a lot of Sun journalists had been arrested over allegations that they'd been paying officials for information for stories. And this was running in conjunction with phone hacking, but the specific issue was about paying officials rather than the phone hacking. And basically Rupert Murdoch was talking to them about that, and there were a whole series of revelations that came out of this secret recording. We initially did it at X-Ray with Channel 4 News. The story went around the world because obviously Murdoch's an international figure, and it gave us a real insight into kind of how he operates, how he thinks. And it was very embarrassing for him. It did spark. There was already an investigation, obviously, a police investigation going on into allegations of basically bribery, which resulted in prosecutions which basically did not succeed in convicting any journalists, although they did convict some of the officials. And actually, our story caused the police to specifically look at Murdoch because it appeared to show a degree of complicity. Because the big revelation was that he admitted knowing right from when he bought the News of the World back in 1967, he knew that there was a kind of culture of paying officials, i.e. paying bribes. He knew that right back then. So the question was, well, does that mean there's a culpability on his part for this widespread company practice?
Yeah.
Of course, that went nowhere in the end. He wasn't prosecuted, and indeed even those journalists who were prosecuted weren't actually convicted.
But the culture has changed, and it has across many things, because you say in 76, I'm sure nobody would have thought that was an issue then.
Yeah, back in the 60s, in fact, yeah.
Just to compare it to something that's happening now, there's sort of this furore over the song Fairytale in New York. Because of some of the language, and the language is very crass and homophobic in some parts.
But isn't it a misunderstanding of the word faggot?
Well, I'm not sure.
It doesn't matter though. But everybody knows what that word means.
Yeah,
now.
in culture. But the thing is, I myself actually tweeted the lyrics to that about 4 years in 2014 at Christmas. You know, at Christmas I always tweet the lyrics, but I guess I couldn't do that now. I redacted that word even then, 2014. But then nobody had an issue with me doing that at the time. Everybody's, isn't it nice? They're tweeting this language. But now, if I did that, I would get a Twitter storm against me. So that is a culture change just in 4 years. So from 76 to 2000, whenever you revealed it, 2012, 13, that's a long time for the culture to change. So maybe he wasn't culpable. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, my personal view is that it's an Irish slang word that he's using. I know people have use the word in a different way since. Language does change, that's true. All I can say on it is I'd much rather listen to that at Christmas than another Cliff Richard song.
Yeah, that's true. But sorry, go ahead.
No, I don't know. I just think you just have to listen to what gay people are saying on this, and that word is very triggering for some people, and that is the last word some people hear before they die, and I just don't see what's a big deal. And when you actually listen to that song, it really does jump out at you. It's horrible.
Well, it does, but why wasn't that an issue in 2014, but it is in 2018? That's what I'm trying to get. I think
it was an issue.
It always was. It's just that we've got social media now.
We can now hear these ideas and they get bounced around. I don't like it. I won't, if I'm in a song, if I'm in a restaurant or anywhere and they're playing that song, I will say turn it off.
Really?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Turn it off.
Fair enough.
Because it's just not fair.
I think I hadn't even noticed the word until I tweeted it and then redacted that word 4 years ago. And now I just wonder.
Things you don't understand. Like, okay, for instance, I remember doing a thing with Richard Herring on radio for a while ago, and it was an episode about gollywogs, and we were having this conversation. And this whole argument came up that years ago it was absolutely fine, they were toys and stuff, but like you said, whenever it changes, you have to respect that.
Yeah.
And it was only when I was doing that episode, and for some reason the expression Jap's eye came up. I've used that for years, and it was only then I went, oh my God, I've just realised what this is.
Actually means.
This is absolutely disgusting. I never knew for a long time.
You just told me as well.
So when you know, it's like Maya Angelou said, when you don't know, you just do what you do, and when you know better, do better.
Yeah, that's true. That's a lot to do. I watch a lot of 90s and 80s films, and like go back to them and watch them now. It's like, oh my God.
There was a Jake Gyllenhaal film, Boy in the Bubble. And the first time I watched it, I think I might have been smoking, and I thought it was hilarious. And I watched it, I was like, oh my God, that film's coming on. I watched it, I was like, oh my God, this is one of the worst things I've ever seen. What was I looking at the last time? I don't think there was one set of people that they didn't offend. Like, it was horrific. It was absolutely horrific. And I was like, oh my goodness.
Yeah. So we're also, we were talking about Rupert Murdoch, and I want to know, do you think he's culpable in 76 as he is culpable in 2012 about knowing that his journalists or any journalists are paying politicians or any officials, police, etc.?
Well, as I say, what we knew was that he had some level of awareness back in the 60s, going back as far as the 60s. In terms of state of knowledge since then, of course, he endlessly denied it. I've found that less than convincing on his part. But I'd be careful about using the word culpable. And it's for this reason. I mean, we started off talking about this huge culture of secrecy we have in Britain. I think a lot of journalists do inevitably get very frustrated with this, and they try very hard to, as it were, get around it. And I think one of the things that was going on at The Sun and many other newspapers was they were finding these tricks, maybe even breaches of the law, to get around it. And one can sort of understand why. Now, freedom of information is a legal mechanism to access material, but it's very tricky to use, and you're facing public bodies that basically don't want to give up information. It's a constant battle. So I suppose it was kind of their own form of freedom of information, just not a legal one.
Okay. So what should we go into next? I've got this a little bit out. We're on the NDA podcast show, and we've talked a bit about NDAs from our sort of layman's position. Ava knows a bit more than I do, certainly, but you would, I think, know a lot more than us. So perhaps you can take us through NDAs. Maybe look at a case, or what?
Well, I don't know if I know a lot more about it, but it is again something that as a journalist you bump into. I am someone who spends a lot of time talking to whistleblowers of one sort or another. And there's a lot of pressure on whistleblowers not to talk. And we mentioned the Official Secrets Act, which is a really blunt instrument that's used as a threat to hang over people who worked, for government essentially in one form or another. But NDAs is another manifestation of that, where standing for non-disclosure agreements. Now, what has to be understood, first of all, is that there are perfectly legitimate reasons for using NDAs. That shouldn't be forgotten. So in normal commercial dealings, if you're... I've had this where people have approached me with an idea, a proposition, perhaps for a new publication. Mm-hmm. And indeed, when Extra started, this was an example of this. People might come to you and say, I've got this idea, but I need you to sign an NDA first in order to stop you just nicking the idea of doing
and I'm in that sort of thing with the book I'm doing, actually. Right. But yeah.
This is perfectly fine. This is a perfectly legitimate way of using NDAs. But what also quite often happens is where, for example, an employee of a company finds something out that the company's doing wrong, or that the boss is doing wrong. It might be to do with sexual harassment. It might not be to do. It might be to do with corruption. And often what ends up happening is they come to a settlement when they leave, and the key element of that settlement, from the employer's point of view, is signing the NDA. Do not talk about what you know. This bad thing that we're doing.
And when you say settlement, you mean there's money involved at that point?
There is money involved, right. Invariably, because that's what the employee...
So they're paying people money to keep silent, basically?
Yeah, that's basically right.
And that is legal?
It is legal. What, again, is often misunderstood is that doesn't stop anyone going to... it would be illegal if it tried to stop anyone going to the authorities or the police. So if it's a criminal matter, you're still allowed to do that. But of course, in terms of, say, talking to the press, it often precludes them from that. So sometimes when you're talking to whistleblowers, for all sorts of reasons, it's very important that they remain confidential. And so it's important, you kind of find yourself almost sort of training them into how to act so that they don't leave a trail by which they can be caught as a source.
Oh, well, there's been the big case about that. The reality winner with The Intercept. Do you know about that? Oh gosh, I don't know. She's a left-wing sort of person who worked for the government in America, and she sent some information to The Intercept, which they followed up, but somehow didn't really kind of cover their tracks enough that she was confidential. But she also didn't cover her tracks on her end, and she's been arrested and she's been in jail since then.
Did she email them from work?
Well, there's that. There's all sorts of stuff. There's printing which had identification, and it was a shame on both parts. But it's the biggest shame for her because she's in prison, and there is a campaign to try and get her out. But
I must say I didn't know about that case, but it's horrifying. And quite often when sources do come forward, you find yourself as a journalist just talking them through about what they've done and what they're going to do to try to help them protect themselves. Because of course, yes, you have a responsibility as a journalist not to identify them, obviously, and that doesn't just mean not naming them, it means giving any clues about who they are. But your responsibility actually goes further than that, because often people don't really understand what they're dealing with. And I've found over the years with whistleblowers that it can often be a really traumatizing effect. It's life-changing for them in terms of, of course it means they've left their employer, they've lost their job in one way or the other, but its ramifications can be much wider than that for them. And that they're often in a traumatized state while at the same time wanting to expose some example of wrongdoing.
Yeah.
So you kind of have to help them.
They're being brave just coming to you. So getting them over that's
and see,
hurdle.
going back, started off talking about the culture of secrecy. This is another manifestation. We have this culture in this country of despising the snitch. I mean, that very word, the idea of snitching. Well, hang on. If you're exposing corruption, for example, you're working for a defence company which is paying bribes to secure a contract, which of course goes on, then that's not snitching. That is revealing something that should be revealed. You know, it may be that you should be revealing it to the authorities, although we keep seeing examples where the authorities don't seem all that interested in rooting that out. So your next course really is to journalists, and they have to be very careful, because they may, I mean, just as an example, even though they're in the defence industry, they may have found themselves signing the Official Secrets Act, so that can be used as a threat against them. They might have their employer come after them for breaking their NDA, and of course it might cause them enormous problems in trying to find other work if they're known as the person who blew the whistle.
A guy who works in banking and compliance that blew the whistle.
Oh, really?
And can't work again.
Really?
Never really thought about that. Everybody knows.
Yeah.
And so
they have the
Can we think of an example of a whistleblower that has been revealed, that has been, has been given the plaudits they should have?
I think it's happened in the States, but I don't think it's happened here. No.
Yeah.
If the best it goes for whistleblower over here is that no one ever knows about them. Yeah. They know about what they've exposed. They don't know about them. And I mean, in my working life, there were so many whistleblowers I've dealt with, and no one knows who they are.
Oh, wow.
So they've, in a sense, if this is the right way of putting it, they've got away with it.
Yeah.
And yet they've managed to reveal something, expose something they wanted to expose. So that counts as a success.
I wonder if that's actually stymiing our film industry, because when there is a whistleblower who is revealed in America, quite often there's a film made about them.
Right.
I think there was one on the tobacco industry.
That's
There's been various things.
The Brockovich was another one, and the Edward Snowden thing.
So it's a culture of England or Britain. Compared to,
but it starts when you're young.
Generally.
It starts at school and stuff. It's you're always encouraged to keep your mouth shut, and not to be a snitch and not to be a telltale. And what happens to you? I mean, when we were at school, if anyone snitched, they were sent to Coventry. If you're at boarding school,
but that's
sent
different
to Coventry.
from a corporate.
No, but I'm saying it's drilled into you when you're younger.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean? I mean, even in the prisons, like if you're a snitch in prison, you might as well just get rid of yourself or chuck hot water in your own face, because it's coming.
Wow.
Because it's just that, and I hate it. I really hate it. And we have a thing in Caribbean culture as well about not informing, and I hate all of it, because I just think it just keeps so many people down and keeps so many people in power, actually. And half the people who are abiding by these rules are actually inadvertently oppressing themselves.
Yeah.
And it's annoying to me, because it's across the board. It's like, I remember being younger, and sometimes the Caribbean community, if there was a guy and he was beating up women or stuff, it's like, you can't say anything. Are you an informer? Are you going to go to the police? Do you know what I mean? And it's just like, so we're actually selling out ourselves.
But that's interconnected to how the police work as well, because they will come down on a black male harder than they would on somebody else, or in a different way. So I understand. So not that I understand or condone. No, exactly. When there's violence against women or violence against anybody, then you inform and you make sure that stops happening.
Well, that's the thing. It's like if you know that, then just, and you're a black man and you know that, just don't beat up your woman.
Yeah.
Because
I want to pick up something you said earlier. You said that this is ingrained into even children. I think that's true, and we are now slowly, not surely, but slowly exposing this kind of legacy we have in this country, and it's not just this country, of child sexual abuse in institutions left, right and centre, in this country and elsewhere. And if you instill in children the idea that they shouldn't speak up, well, this is obviously a massive, you need to do the precise opposite. You need to encourage children to talk. Now, I'm not saying that's going to solve everything by any means, but it's one.
I think that's what millennials are doing in terms of talking about their feeling, talking about how they feel, and they're getting a lot of crap for it and being called snowflakes and this and that and the other. But I mean, I had a headmaster at my prep school who was a pedo, and he was.
Was he convicted?
Did he actually get convicted? He was in all the papers and stuff.
Oh, wow.
He was an absolute idiot. But his whole thing was, like you said, it was like, you don't tell anyone anything. And I remember once he just like had me in a study, like, so if you've got the wax at school, right, I may or may not make it, but if you've got the wax at school, right, you're not supposed to have your knickers or anything taken down. And he did that to me, and he was like, and you don't tell anyone. I was like, oh, hell no, I'm telling everyone. I ran straight in the corridor and went, guess what he just did?
Oh, my God.
And then I ended up expelled not long afterwards.
Oh,
but
wow.
there was a real thing in that whole school. Like, you do not snitch, you do not say anything. And it leaves people terrified.
Was it a
And I think
Catholic
it's
school
changing.
or religious in any way?
Yeah, it was C of E, I think, that one.
Right. Because there was a great documentary on Netflix called The Keepers, which was about predatory priests and a whole school of girls that they kind of, groomed and abused. So you've done quite a lot of work in the area of child sexual abuse. And was that with Exaro or what? Where
it was
where's
initially,
that
yeah. So at Exaro, we really led the reporting on problems surrounding institutional abuse by very powerful people. Now, there's been a hell of a backlash on that, but I suppose before the backlash happened, it did cause the inquiry to be ordered by...
Backlash from who, sorry?
Backlash, certainly in the media, but basically backlash by the state.
Right.
That is trying desperately to keep the lid on very powerful people who were into sexually abusing children, boys or girls. And, we're going to have an awful lot of this playing out over the next years, both in terms of, I think, more revelations, but also more backlash. Since Exaro closed, I've had a lot of people coming forward to me, both survivors of abuse, but also police whistleblowers. There are a lot of police out there who have basically been pulled off, stopped or blocked from investigating various high-profile people because, we just don't want to go down that road, do we? It's not good for the country.
Wow.
And I mean, this, in a sense, this all ties up because this is all about our culture of secrecy, and our culture of secrecy hides some really, really dreadful things.
Yeah, and they had the thing in Belgium, didn't they, as well, where they had where they just had enough of it. And if you see the amount of people that went out into the streets protesting, and it was all crushed because of who's connected.
So to go back,
involved.
I don't know about Belgium. Sorry.
In Belgium, basically, there was a paedophile that was caught, and when he was going to be sentenced, I can't remember his name.
And he was a very powerful figure in the civil service, wasn't it?
Yeah, he was. And when they were going to say, right, you're going to go down, he was like, I'm going to take them all with me, basically. And
it sounds like a Jed Mercurio script or something.
Honestly, it really was. And the people of Belgium went mad, and they just went out in the streets like, you're not going to abuse our kids. And it was crushed.
Wow.
It's absolutely crushed. And I think the same happens here a lot. You have all those survivors, don't you, from the children's homes and stuff, where the politicians used to go around meeting all these kids and stuff. And they were just used and abused by all these really powerful people. And it's, the lack of urgency in the government in actually wanting to do anything about it is because I think it's the same reason. They know all the people that are going to come down. But then
why was the backlash in the media then? Doesn't the media want to, put the state...
I think one thing you have to understand about the way the media works is it makes a great show of holding powerful institutions to account. But this is all complete mirage. It's just not reality.
So you said that there was a backlash, but wouldn't the media want to hold the state to account?
Well, you might think so, but I mean, there is this idea that that's what the media does in this country, but it just doesn't do that. The reality is that the media is manipulated by the state in one form or another, and this goes on at lots of different levels, whether it's just sort of, at a political level, in terms of, briefings and leaks to favoured journalists and so on to set the agenda. So there's a great deal of manipulation that goes on. This issue of child sexual abuse by politicians and very powerful figures is one that really has alarmed, the most powerful interests in this country.
What I was going to ask is, what would you say to a young person that wants to pursue a career in journalism?
Or investigative journalism?
Yeah.
Well,
any kind of journalism.
Yeah,
really,
I think the starting point is if they want to get into journalism, kind of worry about your specialism a bit later, perhaps. I think it's become very tough for people to get into the business unless they come from a very privileged background. There is an expectation, increasingly it seems, for people to have to do sort of effectively unpaid work, often called internships, but it's basically about ripping off young people. And that's fine if you've got rich parents who can sustain you through that and find you somewhere to live, often in London.
That's the lift.
Should we do that?
Just...
Wow.
Okay, they'll get to their destination. Okay, it's from internship, unpaid, blah, blah.
Yeah, so unpaid in internships. I mean, but having said that, it is tougher to get in than I think it was in the past. Certainly when I started, it felt a lot easier. I mean, my route into the industry was I joined an evening newspaper as a reporter straight from. I came from having done a normal degree, and just enrolled on an evening newspaper. Actually, that route is pretty much closed these days because the regional press has found its business model smashed apart, and they're not recruiting people at all, including newcomers, as it were, to the industry. But having said all that, what I'd also say is if you really want to be a journalist, then you're going to be a journalist regardless of the difficulties that might be there.
Mm-hmm. What I was wondering was how much has the internet affected journalism? Because basically anyone can put a blog up. Anyone can do tweets and do But
to me, that isn't journalism. I class journalism. There's 3 types of journalism, in my opinion, which is breaking news reporting, where you go on scene, whether that's in this country or not. I personally was a breaking news reporter in Uganda and covered landslides, terrorist attack. And then there's grassroots journalism where you're embedded in the communities, and then there's lobby journalism where I think there's people such as Caitlin Moran, all of the Owen Jones, even Marina Hyde. I don't class them as journalism. I class them as the columnist class. So it depends on what you think journalism is.
No, it's not that I disagree with you on the definition of journalism. I'm just kind of wondering, because the way we consume our news now is so different, has it affected the industry in there's not so many people who can get into it because not everybody sits down and watches this 10 o'clock news like we all used to, or not everybody buys a newspaper every day.
I think that's probably a good thing in many ways. I mean, going back to your point about nearly everyone can write a blog, well, of course, going back to your point about everyone can write a blog, well, of course, everyone can write a blog, but they're generally not worth reading. Yeah. I mean, there will be exceptions to that, of course, and there might be exceptions in terms of people who aren't journalists or who have no particular experience or background in writing, and they can be good, but they're pretty rare. And I suppose the thing is, it's that kind of...
Is that about editing?
I was going to say curating. It's all about curation, and how do you, as a consumer, for example, go about finding something that's worth reading? Now, don't get me wrong, I don't think you should just search out the mainstream media. As I was saying earlier, there's all sorts of problems with how they're manipulated by the powers that be, which if you're interested in holding power to account in all sorts of different ways and different levels, then not much point going there, on the whole, with the odd exception here and there. But it's quite difficult to identify what you should be looking for. So for journalists, I don't feel there is really a threat from that quarter. And in terms of the internet generally, I think it has caused problems for the industry in that I just mentioned how the regional press has been blown apart as an industry. The national press is not looking in great shape either. So a lot of the traditional media, as we've known it over the last few decades, is hugely undermined. But on the other side of the coin, you have new opportunities springing up online in one form or another. And Extra was an example of that. It was a totally new publication that was absolutely leading the charge on some big stories that actually caused the mainstream media to follow in our wake. It caused a lot of professional jealousy, inevitably, but because they don't like that. But that we're doing the job that they've been failing to do for so long.
Yeah. So is there a lot of bitchiness in journalism?
Of course there is. Yeah. I mean, bitchiness is probably not quite the right word, but
who's your nemesis, Mark? Tell us who your nemesis is. There must be. Really, I have a couple. Oh my
couple. She's got more than a couple.
I have plenty of Twitter trolls, but they're not worth mentioning.
Yeah. Oh well, yeah, indeed. Mute. Okay. Well, that's been a fantastic session or interview. We're so glad you came on. I think I'm going to put a list of sort of resources that people can have a look at and maybe look a bit more at your work. Maybe you'll send me an email with some of those links as well. Okay. But anything, last words you'd like to say or anything like that?
Well, I mean, talking about new things springing up, I suppose this podcast is an example of that, isn't it? It's the kind of thing one couldn't have done, not that long ago. Yeah. So I think it's important for everyone to keep in mind that although the internet causes problems for the industry, actually it creates a lot of opportunities as well.
Yeah. Brilliant, Nate.
Nice way to end. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much.
Lucifer, dawn of the morning, I'm gonna chase you out of earth. Lucifer, dawn of the morning.
from the murder capital, where we murder for capital.
And so we're going to move on now to Get in the Bin. And what is this week's Get in the Bin for you?
This week's Get in the Bin is to Peter Tatchell. Look, he wrote an article about Buju Banton, who has just been released from jail, and he started talking about murder music and all of this. Everybody knows how I feel about that kind of music and stuff. It's not... I don't like it. It makes me cringe. When I hear it, I will tell people to turn it off. If you're playing it in public, I will call the police on you. That is how strongly I feel about it. However, what annoyed me is The Guardian got Peter Tatchell to write this thing. First of all, he's conflating issues. Buju Banton was not actually in prison for homophobia, and he dealt with that issue quite a few times before he went to prison.
That song came out a long time ago.
I think he was about 15, and I'm not excusing him. The song was disgusting.
He was 15 years old.
Apparently, he was 15 when he wrote that song. I'm not excusing that song. The point is, the lead voices on this, it's not even going to be me. I'm a cis-het black woman. Okay, the lead voices on this issue should be black and bisexual gay men, and probably those from a Caribbean background. Why Peter Tatchell has decided to be an opportunist, like he always is. He just storms into issues that have got nothing to do with him. And even when there's been LGBTQI African people who've said, can you back off? You're actually making our life worse.
Yeah.
He doesn't care.
It's not even just Africa. He will go Caribbean, Africa, Iran. He's had issues with,
There's more important voices. So I would like, if you're an editor and you trying to do that kind of story, try and get the people from that community, or try and get the people who are most affected to use their voices. There's so many great tweets from black gay men who are in the middle of this whole situation that we could all learn from. You can't learn anything from Peter Tatchell. So right now, Peter Tatchell, go out on bin day, go to the pavement, take off the lid of the bin, get in, close the lid on yourself and stay in there. Stay in the bin. You're a bloody nuisance. Why don't you do what you used to do? Because my daughter's godfather is a gay guy who said, back in the day, what Peter Tatchell used to do was go down to cruising areas and stand there, and if the police came, he would blow a whistle and say, police are coming, do that. Do that.
So my Get in the Bin this week is regarding a story that came out about the first female Ballon d'Or winner, who is called Ada Herderberg. She's 23. She made history by becoming the first ever female winner of this award. But her moment was somewhat overshadowed by the host, Martin Solveig, who I believe is a DJ, asking her about twerking after she collected her award. So she, again, as I've said, the first woman making history, was asked to twerk as she collected her award. After she'd done a really inspirational speech as well. I mean, what is that? What sort of, male entitlement, crazy...
disrespectful
thing. Why would that even come up at that point?
That's men.
That's men.
When I
that's
say
men. But that's men in front of a massive audience.
They don't care.
They don't care. Okay.
They don't.
Well, okay. So anyway,
I'm glad there was backlash though.
Yeah, there's been a lot of backlash, and I think he's made various useless apologies that haven't really got to the issue of why at the root he did that, because that's a lot about misogyny and sexism that you would because he's never going to do that to a man. I mean, I don't even know what the equivalent would be to ask a man at the time when he's at the pinnacle of his career, collecting an award that's a first sort of thing that he could get.
It would be can you dagger?
Dagger? I don't.
But then he'd be admired if he said yes.
Yeah,
I that's the only equivalent I could think of.
I can't remember it. So for that reason, my Get in the Bin this week is Martin Solveig.
Bye, Martin. Get in the bin.
Get in the bin.
You know what you have to do.
Okay, and so then we move on now to Hearing Fabulous. Who is your Hearing Fabulous person this
My
week?
Hearing Fabulous this week is going to be Mark Thompson. Now, we all know that World AIDS Day is on the 1st of December, and it's something that I like to draw awareness of, and I do that for the whole of December. Mark Thompson is a co-founder, I think, but I know he's very involved in Blackout UK, and they do a lot to help young black gay men who also, they face homophobia, but they also face racism in the mainstream.
I don't think he's the founder of Black Out UK, is he?
Well, he's co-editor of Black Out UK. He does it
okay.
with... Did you know that organisation?
Yeah, I know the organisation. The guy who runs it used to run Runnymede. I'm forgetting his name very temporarily, but I just saw him. I saw him a couple of weeks ago.
I can't remember because every time I go to their parties, I'm drunk. But anyway, Mark Thompson is now, he is the face of these new postcards, and it's called the Undetectables. And basically they are from GM, the Twitter handle is @GMFA_UK. And basically they're trying to raise awareness of the fact that somebody who is HIV positive, they have a viral load, basically. And without treatment, the viral load can be high. With treatment, your viral load can be undetectable. So I think it's really good that they're raising awareness. He also works with Prepsters UK and gives a lot of young black gay and bisexual men information on PrEP treatment. And he's been absolutely amazing, leading force in the black gay community in general, but he really concentrates on helping other young black gay men. So he is here and fabulous.
Fantastic.
Love you, Mark. Fake Bajan.
So my Here and Fabulous this week is Amy Falone. She is the co-founder of Nights Of, which is an independent, commercial, inclusive children's books publisher. And the reason, apart from the fact that is just amazing, because what they do is publish writers of colour who publish books for children, which is so important. But she's at the moment they're doing a crowdfunder to fund some pop-up bookshops for children of colour, basically. But Nights of they're called, publishes commercial children's fiction. They distribute it throughout the UK, Ireland and Europe, and they're about diversity as much as possible, and they want to make sure that the books they publish give windows into worlds, as many worlds as possible, and that's from what's on the page all the way till the sales copy. They were started by Amy Falone, who's my Here and Fabulous, and David Stevens, and their Twitter is @_Nights Of, and they're currently crowdfunding. I think they need £30,000, which is quite a bit, to get these inclusive pop-up shops running. So if you can go to their Twitter, look for their crowdfunder and help get like books for like Black and Asian and East Asian and just lots of little children who don't get to see themselves reflected in books usually, that'd be great. Amy Falone is my Here and Fabulous this week.
Yay!
So I guess that's the end.
That's the end of episode 3.
Fantastic. So all we have to say is thank you for joining NDA Podcast once again.
And if you're not following us on Twitter, follow us and tell your friends to follow us.
Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, we will
iTunes, everywhere. We're
iTunes,
everywhere.
YouTube, we are pretty much everywhere. So yeah, you should follow us and subscribe, please. And we'll see you next time, where we'll have the editor-in-chief of Media Diversified, Marcus Daniel, talking all about Whitney.
Yay.
I said it with my chest and I don't care who I offend.